over 50 years now, boys and girls and mums and dads have read and reread Kenneth Grahame's magical story of Mr. Toad and his friends Ratty, Mole and Badger. 4 animals who were sometimes so stupid and sometimes so wise that they were just like human beings. For those who've not yet had the pleasure of their company, and for the thousands who'd like to meet them again, this is the story of The Wind in the Willows. Was it an hour, or 2, or perhaps even 3? The mole wasn't sure just how long he'd been dozing in the sun on this, his first day on the river. It certainly seemed a long time since he and Rat had tucked into their enormous lunch. But what had caught his attention in his half-waking state was a streak of bubbles travelling along the surface of the river. "What are you looking at, Mole?" inquired the Rat. "I'm looking," said the Mole, "at those strange bubbles." "Bubbles, ha-ha!" said the Rat in a cheery sort of way. And then a broad, glistening muzzle showed itself above the edge of the bank, and the otter hauled himself out and shook the water from his coat. "Greedy beggars," he observed, making for the hamper. "Why didn't you invite me, Ratty?" "Well, this was an impromptu affair," explained the Rat. "Oh, by the way, my friend Mr. Mole." "Oh, proud, I'm sure," said the otter, and the 2 animals were friends forthwith. "Such a rumpus everywhere," continued the otter. "All the world seems out in the river today. I came up this backwater to try and get a moment's peace, and then stumble upon you fellas. At least, beg your pardon, I don't exactly mean that, you know." There was a rustle behind them, proceeding from a hedge wherein last year's leaves still clung thick, and a stripy head with high shoulders behind it peered forth on them. "Come on, old Badger!" shouted the Rat. The Badger looked round at the assembled animals, grunted, company," then turned his back and disappeared from view. "That's just the sort of fellow he is," observed the disappointed Rat. "Simply hates society. Now we shan't see any more of him today. Anyway, Otter, tell us who's out on the river today." "Toad's out for one," replied the Otter. "In his brand new wager boat, new togs, new everything." "Once it was nothing but sailing," said the Rat. "Then he tired of that and took to punting. Nothing would please him but to punt all day and every day. And a nice mess he made of it. Last year it was houseboating, and we all had to go and stay with him in his houseboat and pretend we liked it. He was going to spend the rest of his life in a houseboat. It's all the same, whatever he takes up, he gets tired of it and starts on something fresh. Such a good fellow, too," remarked the Otter reflectively. "But no stability, especially in a boat." From where they sat, they could get a glimpse of the main stream across the island that separated them, and just then a wager boat flashed into view. The rower, a short, stout figure, splashing badly and rolling a good deal, but working his hardest. The Rat stood up and hailed him, but Toad, for it was he, ignored him and kept sternly at his work. "He'll be out of that boat in a minute if he rolls like that," said the Rat, sitting down again. "Of course he will," chuckled the Otter. "Did I ever tell you that good story about Toad and the lockkeeper? It happened this way. Toad was staying..." An errant mayfly swerved unsteadily athwart the current, in the intoxicated fashion affected by young bloods of mayflies seeing life. A swirl of water and a cloop, and the mayfly was visible no more. Neither was the Otter. The Mole looked down. The voice was still in his ears, but not an otter to be seen as far as the distant horizon. But again, there was a streak of bubbles on the surface of the river. The Rat hummed a tune, and the Mole, though still amazed, recollected that animal etiquette forbade any sort of comment on the sudden disappearance of one's friends at any moment, for any reason or no reason whatsoever. "Well, well," said the Rat, "I suppose we ought to be moving. Now, I wonder which of us had better pack the luncheon basket." He didn't speak as if he was frightfully eager for the treat. "Oh, please let me," said the Mole. So, of course, the Rat let him. Packing the basket wasn't quite such pleasant work as unpacking the basket. It never is. But the mole was bent on enjoying everything. And although whenever he strapped up the basket, he realized he'd left something out, he got the job finished at last without too much loss of temper. It was only then that Mole realized how tired and weary he was after his day of sunshine and fresh air. For it was all he could do to lift the basket and stagger with it down to the boat. You see, unlike the tough, weather-beaten rat, Mole was not really an out-of-doors chap at all, and a life underground hardly suits one to the rigours of riverside life. So with a final heave, he managed to deposit himself and the basket in the boat, while the rat prepared to push off from the bank. The afternoon sun was getting low as the rat sculled gently homewards in a dreamy sort of mood, murmuring poetry things over to himself and not paying much attention to Mole. In his tired state, the Mole watched the effortless sculling of his newfound companion, this confident riverside character, so knowledgeable, so strong, so dependable. But the Mole was not without his pride. So feeling already quite at home in a boat, so he thought, and a little envious and restless, he put to the rat what was slightly more than a question. Ratty, please, I want to row now. The rat shook his head with a smile. Not yet, my young friend, he said. Wait till you've had a few lessons. It's not quite so easy as it looks. The Mole was quiet for a minute or two, but he began to feel more and more jealous of Rat, sculling so strongly and so easily along, and his pride began to whisper that he could do it every bit as well. He jumped up and seized the sculls so suddenly that the rat, who'd been gazing out over the water and saying more poetry things to himself, was taken by surprise and fell backwards off his seat with his legs in the air for the second time. The triumphant Mole took his place and grabbed the sculls with entire confidence. "Stop it, you silly ass!" cried the rat from the bottom of the boat. "You can't do it. You'll have us over." The Mole flung the sculls back with a flourish, made a great dig at the water, and missed the surface altogether. His legs flew up above his head, and he found himself lying on top of the prostrate rat. Greatly alarmed, he made a grab at the side of the boat, and the next moment, sploosh! Over went the boat, and he found himself struggling in the river. Oh my, how cold the water was, and oh, how very wet it felt. How it sang in his ears as he went down, down, down. How bright and welcome the sun looked as he rose to the surface, coughing and spluttering. How black was his despair when he felt himself sinking again. And then a firm paw gripped him by the back of his neck. It was the rat, and he was evidently laughing. The Mole could feel him laughing right down his arm and through his paw as he was hauled to the surface. The rat got hold of the sculls and shoved them under the Mole's arms, and swimming behind, propelled the helpless animal to the shore. The Mole looked and felt a squashy, pulpy lump of misery. Once they'd clambered onto the bank, the rat said, "Now then, old fellow, trot up and down the towing path as hard as you can till you're warm and dry again while I dive for the luncheon basket." So the dismal Mole, wet without and ashamed within, trotted about till he could feel some warmth pushing out the river cold and drying off his bedraggled fur. When he looked round, he realized that the rat had recovered the boat, righted her and made her fast, had rescued all his floating property by degrees, and was finally struggling ashore with the luncheon basket. When all was ready for a start once more, the Mole, limp and dejected, took his seat in the stern of the boat. And as they set off, he said in a low voice, broken with emotion, "Ratty, my generous friend, I'm very sorry indeed for my foolish and ungrateful conduct. My heart quite fails me when I think how I might have lost that beautiful luncheon basket. Indeed, I've been a complete ass, and I know it. Please overlook it this once and forgive me, and let things go on as before." "That's all right, bless you," responded the rat cheerily. "What's a little wet to a water rat? I'm more in the water than out of it most days. Don't think any more about it. And look here, I really think you'd better come and stop with me for a little time. It's very plain and rough, you know, not like Toad's house at all. But of course you haven't seen that yet. Still, I can make you comfortable. And I'll teach you to row and to swim, and you'll soon be as handy on the water as any of us. The mole was so touched by his kind manner of speaking that he could find no voice to answer him, and he had to brush away a tear or two with the back of his paw. But the rat kindly looked in another direction, and so presently the mole's spirits revived again, and he was even able to give some straight back talk to a couple of moorhens who were sniggering to each other about his bedraggled appearance. When they got home, the rat made a bright fire in the parlour and planted the mole in an armchair in front of it, having fetched down a dressing gown and slippers for him. And as they had their supper in front of the fire, the rat told him river stories, and very thrilling stories they were too, to an earth-dwelling animal like mole. Stories about weirs and sudden floods, and leaping pike, and night fishings with otter, or excursions far afield with badger. Oh, supper was a most cheerful meal. But very shortly afterwards, a terribly sleepy mole just had to go to bed. And in the best bedroom, he laid his head on his pillow in great peace and contentment, knowing that his other new friend, the river, was lapping the sill of his window. That day was only the first of many similar ones for the emancipated mole, each of them longer and fuller of interest as the ripening summer moved onward. He learnt to swim and to row, and entered into the joy of running water. And with his ear to the reed stems, he caught at intervals something of what the wind went whispering so constantly among them. In our next episode, the rat and the mole visit Toad Hall, and Mr. Toad takes them out onto the open road.